The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle, the 1903 compilation. In ancient days there lived a very noble king named Uther Pendragon, and he became overlord of all of Britain. This king was very greatly aided unto the achievement of the Pendragonship of the realm by the aid of his two men, who rendered him great assistance in all that he did. The one of these men was a certain very powerful enchanter and sometime prophet, known to men as Merlin the Wise, and he gave very good counsel unto Uther Pendragon. The other man was an excellent noble and renowned knight, hight Ulfius, who was thought by many to be the greatest leader in war of any man then alive, and he gave Uther Pendragon aid and advice in battle. So with the help of Merlin and Sir Ulfius, Uther Pendragon was able to overcome all of his enemies and to become king of the entire realm. After Uther Pendragon had ruled his kingdom for a number of years, he took to wife a certain beautiful and gentle lady, hight Igraine. This noble dame was the widow of Gerlois, the Duke of Tintagel, by which the prince she had two daughters, one of whom was named Margase and the other Morgana le Fay. And Morgana le Fay was a famous sorceress. These daughters the queen brought with her to court of Uther Pendragon after she had married the puissant king. And there Margase was wedded to King Uraine of Gore, and Morgana le Fay was wedded to the King Lot of Orkney. Now after a while Uther Pendragon and Queen Igraine had a son born unto them, and he was very beautiful, and of great size and strength of bone. And whilst the child lay wrapped in his swaddle, clothes and lying in a cradle of gold and ultramarine, Merlin came to Uther Pendragon with a spirit of prophecy strong upon him, for such was often with the case with him. And speaking in that spirit of prophecy, he said, Lord, it is given unto me to foresee that thou shalt shortly fall sick of a fever, and thou shalt soon maybe die in a violent sweat that will follow thereon. Now, should such a dolorous thing fall upon us, this young child, who is certes the hope of all of this realm, will be in very great danger of his life, for many enemies will assuredly rise up with a design to seize upon him for the sake of his inheritance, and either he will be slain, or else he will be held in captivity, from which he shall hardly have hope to escape. Wherefore, I do beseech thee, Lord, thou wilt permit Sir Ulfius and myself to presently convey the child away to some place of safe refuge, where he may be hidden in secret until he groweth to manhood, and is able to guard himself from such dangers as may threaten him. When Merlin had made an end of speaking thus, Uther Pendragon made reply with a very steadfast countenance in this wise. Merlin, so far as my death is concerned, when my name cometh to die, I believe God will give me grace to meet my end with entire cheerfulness. For, certes, my lot is with that wise no different from that of any other man who hath been born of woman. But touching the matter of this young child, if thy prophecy be true, then his danger is very great, and it would be well that we should have conveyed hence to some place of safe harborage, as thou dost advise. Wherefore I pray thee to perform thy will in this affair, bearing in thy heart the consideration that the child is the most precious inheritance which I shall leave unto this land. All this, as it was said, Uther Pendragon spake with great calmness and equanimity of spirit. And Merlin did as he was advised, and he and Sir Ulfius conveyed the child away by night, and no one but they wist whither the babe had been taken. And shortly afterward Uther Pendragon was seized with the sickness as Merlin had foretold, and he died exactly as Merlin had feared that he would die. Wherefore it was very well that the child should have been taken to a place of safety. And after Uther Pendragon had departed from this life, it was likewise as Merlin had feared, for all the realm fell into great disorder. For each lesser king contended against his fellow for overlordship, and wicked knights and barons harried the highways as they listed there, and levied toll with great cruelty upon the helpless wayfarers. For some such travelers they took prisoners and held for ransom, while others they slew because they had no ransom to pay. So it was a very common sight to see a dead man lying on the roadside, if you should venture to make a journey upon some business or other. Thus it befell that, after a while, all the dolorous land groaned with the trouble that lay upon it. Thus there passed nearly 18 years in such great affliction, and then one day the Archbishop of Canterbury summoned Merlin to him and bespake him in this wise. Merlin, Men say that thou art the wisest man in all the world. Canst thou not find some means to heal the distractions of this woeful realm? Bend thou thy wisdom to this matter, and choose thou a king who shall be a fit overlord, so that they may enjoy happiness of life once more as we did in the days of Uther Pendragon. Then Merlin lifted up his countenance upon the archbishop, and spake in this wise: My lord, the spirit of prophecy that lieth upon me sometimes moveth me now to say that I do perceive that this country is soon to have a king who shall be wiser and greater and more worthy of praise than was even Uther Pendragon, and he shall bring order and peace where there is now disorder and war. Moreover, I shall tell you that this king shall be of Uther Pendragon's own full blood royal. To this the archbishop said, What thou tellest me, Merlin, is a wonderfully strange thing. But in the spirit of prophecy, canst thou foretell when this king is to come? And canst thou tell us how we shall know him when he appeareth among us? For many lesser kings there are who would fain to be overlord of this land, and many such there are who deem themselves fit to rule over all others. How then shall we know the real king from those who may proclaim themselves to be the rightful king? My lord archbishop, quoth Merlin, if I have thy leave for to exert my magic, I shall set an adventure, which if any man achieve it, all the world shall straightway know that he is the rightful king and overlord of this realm. And to this the archbishop said, Merlin, I bid thee do whatsoever may seem to thee to be right in this affair. And Merlin said, I will do so. So Merlin caused by magic that a huge marble stone, 4 square, should suddenly appear in an open place before the cathedral door. And upon this block of marble he caused it that there should stand an anvil, and into the anvil he caused that there should be thrust a great naked sword midway deep of the blade. And this sword was of the most wonderful that any man had ever seen, for the blade was of blue steel and extraordinarily bright and glittering, and the hilt was of gold, chased and carved with marvelous cunning, and inlaid with a great number of precious stones, so that it shone with wonderful brightness in the sunlight. And about the sword were written these words in letters of gold: Whoso pulleth out this sword from the anvil, that same is right wise king born of England. So a great many people came and gazed upon that sword, and marveled at it exceedingly, for its like had never been seen beheld before upon the earth. Then when Merlin had accomplished this miracle, he bade the archbishop to call together all the chief people of that land upon Christmas tide, and he bade the archbishop to command that every man should make essay to draw out the sword, for that he who should succeed in drawing it forth out the anvil should be rightwise king of Britain. So the archbishop did accordingly as Merlin said, and this was the marvel of the marble stone in the anvil, of which the same anyone could easily read for himself in that book written a very long while ago by Robert de Baron, which is called Le Roman de Merlin. Now when the mandate of the Lord Archbishop went forth summoning the chief people of the lands to essay in that miracle, for indeed it was a miracle to draw forth a sword blade out of an anvil of solid iron, all of the realm became immediately cast into a great ferment, so that each man asked his fellow, Who shall draw forth that sword, and who shall be our king? Some thought it would be King Lot, and others thought it would be King Uraine of Gore, these being the sons-in-law unto Uther Pendragon. Some thought it would be the King Leo de Grance of Camillard, and others thought it would be King Rience of North Wales. Some thought it would be this king, and others thought it would be that, for all the world was divided into different parties who thought according to their liking. Then, as Christmas tide drew nigh, it presently appeared as though the entire world was wending its way to the London town, for the highways and the byways became filled with wayfarers, kings and lords and knights and ladies and esquires and pages and men-at-arms, all betaking their way whither the essay that was to be made that adventure of the sword and the anvil. Every inn and castle was filled with so full of travelers that it was a marvel how so many folk could be contained within their compass. And everywhere were tents and pavilions pitched along the wayside for the accommodation of those who could not find shelter within doors. But when the archbishop beheld the multitudes that were assembling, he said to Merlin, Indeed, Merlin, it should be a very singular thing if among these great kings and nobles, honorable lords, we should not find some one worthy of being king of this realm. Unto which the Merlin smiled and said, Marvel not, my lord, if among all those who appear to be so extraordinarily worthy there shall not be found one who is worthy. And marvel not, if among all those who are unknown there shall arise one who shall approve himself to be entirely worthy. And the archbishop pondered Merlin's words, and so beginneth this story. Part 1. The Winning of Kinghood. It happened that among those worthies who were summoned unto London town by the mandate of Archbishop as above recounted, that there was a certain knight, very honourable and of high estate, by name Sir Ector of Bonmaison, surnamed the Trustworthy Knight, because of the fidelity which he had kept his counsel for those who confided in him, and because he had always performed unto all men, whether of high or low degree, that which he promised to undertake, without defalcation as to the same. So this noble and excellent knight was held in great regard by all those who knew him, for not only was he thus honourable in conduct, but he was besides of very high estate, being possessed of 7 castles in Wales and the adjoining country north thereof, and likewise of certain fruitful tracts of land with villages entertaining thereunto, and also of sundry of forests of great extent, both of the north country and of the west. This very noble knight had 2 sons. The elder of these was Sir Kay, a young knight of great valor and promise, and already well renowned in the courts of chivalry because of several very honourable deeds of worthy achievement in arms which he had performed. The other was a young lad of 18 years of age, by name Arthur, who at that time was serving with good repute as Sir Kay's esquire at arms. Now, when Sir Ector of Bonmaison received by messenger the mandate of the Archbishop, he immediately summoned these 2 sons upon him, and bade him to prepare straightway for to go with him to London town, and they did so. And in the same manner he bade a great number of retainers and esquires, and pages for to make them ready, and they likewise did so. Thus was a very considerable array of arms with great show of circumstance. Sir Ector of Bonmaison betook his way unto London town, in obedience of the commands of the Archbishop. So when he had come thither, he took up his inn in a certain field where many other noble knights and puissant lords had already established themselves, and there he set up a very fair pavilion of green silk, and erected his banner, emblazoned with the device of his house, to wit, a griffin, black upon a field of green. And upon this field were a great multitude of other pavilions of many different colours, and over above each pavilion was the pennant and the banner of that puissant lord whom the pavilion belonged. Wherefore, because of the multitude of these pennants and banners, the sky was at places well nigh hidden with the gaudy colours of fluttering flags. Among the great lords who had come thither in pursuance of the Archbishop's summons were many famous kings and queens and noblemen of high degree. For there was King Lot of Orkney, who had taken to wife a stepdaughter of Uther Pendragon, and there was King Uraines of Gore, who had taken to wife another stepdaughter of the great king. And there was great King Ban, and King Bors, and King Rience, and King Leodegrance, and many others of like degree, for there was no less than 12 kings and 7 dukes, so that with what their court of lords and ladies and esquires and pages and attendants, the town of London had hardly ever seen the like before that day. Now the Archbishop of Canterbury, having in mind the extraordinary state of the occasion that had brought so many kings and dukes and high lords unto that adventure of the sword and the anvil, had commanded that there should be a very stately and noble tournament proclaimed. Likewise he commanded that this contest at arms should be held in a certain field nigh to the great cathedral 3 days before that assay should be made of the sword and the anvil, which same was to be undertaken, as foresaid, upon Christmas Day. To this tournament there bidden all knights who were of sufficient birth, condition, and quality for to fit with them to take part therein. Accordingly, very many exalted knights made application for admission, and that in such numbers that 3 heralds were kept very busy looking into their pretensions for the right of battle. For these heralds examined the escutcheons and the roll of the lineage of all applicants with great care and great circumspection. Now, when Sir Kay received news of this tournament, he went to where his father was, and when he stood before his face, he spake in this wise: Sire, being thy son, of which thy very high condition both as birth and estate as I have inherited from thee, I find that I have an extraordinary desire to imperil my body in this tourney. Accordingly, if so I may prove my quality as of knighthood, before this college of heralds, it may be as to thy great honour and credit, and to the honour and credit of your house, if I should undertake this adventure. Wherefore I do crave thy leave to go as I have a mind. Unto these Sir Ector made reply: My son, thou hast my leave for to enter this honourable tournament, and I do hope that God will give thee a great deal of strength, and likewise such grace of spirit, that thou mayest achieve honor to thyself and credit to us who are of thy blood." So Sir Kay departed with very great joy, and immediately went to that congress of heralds, and submitted his pretensions to them. And after they had duly examined unto his claims to knighthood, they entered his name as a knight contestant according to his desire, and at this Sir Kay was filled with great content and joy of heart. So when his name had been enrolled upon the list of combatants, Sir Kay chose his younger brother Arthur for to be his esquire at arms, and to carry his spear and pennant before him onto the field of battle. And Arthur was also made exceedingly glad because of the honor that had befallen him and his brother. Now the day having arrived when this tourney was to be held, a very huge concourse of people gathered together to witness that noble and courtly assault at arms. For at that time London was, as foresaid, an extraordinarily full of nobility and knighthood, wherefore it was reckoned that not less than 20,000 lords and ladies, being those 12 kings and courts of 7 dukes of their courts, were assembled in the lists circumjacent to the field of battle, for to witness the performance of those chosen knights. And those noble people sat so close together, and so filled the seats and benches assigned to them, that it appeared as though an entirely solid wall of human souls surrounded that meadow where the battle was to be fought. And any knight may well indeed be moved to do his uttermost upon such a great occasion with the eyes of so many beautiful dames and noble lords gazing upon his performances. Wherefore the hearts of all the knights attendant were greatly expanded with emulation to overturn their enemies into the dust. In the center of this wonderful court of lords and ladies there was an erect the stall of the throne of the Lord Archbishop himself. Above the throne there was a canopy of purple cloth emblazoned with silver lilies, and the throne itself was hung all about with purple cloth of velvet, embroidered alternately with the figure of St. George in gold, with the silver crosses of St. George surrounded by golden halos. Here the Lord Archbishop himself sat in great estate and pomp, being surrounded by a very exalted court of clerks of high degree, and also of knights of honorable estate, so that all the center of the field glittered with the splendor of gold and silver embroidery, and was made beautiful by various colors of rich apparel, and bright with the fine armor of excellent workmanship. And indeed was such of the stateliness of all these circumstances, that very few who were there had ever seen such a noble preparation for battle as that which they had beheld. Now, when all that great assembly were in their place, and everything had been prepared in due wise, a herald came and stood forth before the installment throne of the Archbishop, and blew a very strong, loud blast upon a trumpet. At that signal the turnpikes of the lists were immediately opened, and the 2 parties of knight contestants entered therein, and only one party of the northern extremity on the meadow of the battle, and the other party at the southern extremity thereof. Then immediately all of that lone field was aglitter with the bright shining splendor of the sunlight upon polished armor and encountraments, so that these 2 parties took up their stations, each at such a place that had been assigned upon them, the one of the north and the other of the south. Now the party with which Sir Kay had cast his lot was of the north of the field, and that company was 13 in number, and the other party stood at the south end of the field, and that company was 16 in number. But though the party with whom Sir Kay had attached himself numbered less by 3 than the other party, yet was it stronger by some degree, because there were a number of knights of great strength and renown in that company. Indeed, it may be here mentioned that 2 of those knights afterward became companions in very good credit to the Round Table, to wit, Sir Matador de la Porte and Sir Bedivere, the latter which was the last who saw King Arthur alive upon this earth. So when all was prepared, and according to the ordination of the tournament, and when those knight contestants had made themselves ready in all ways that were necessary, and when they had dressed their spears and their shields in such a manner as befitted knights about to enter serious battle, the herald set his trumpet upon his lips the second time, and blew upon it with great might and main. Then, having sounded his blast, he waited for a while, and then blew upon the trumpet again. And upon that blast, each of those parties of knights quitted his station, and rushed forth with great tumult against the other party, and with such noise and fury that the whole earth groaned beneath the feet of the war horses, and trembled and shook like an earthquake. So those 2 companies met, with one against the other, and in the midst of the field the roar of the breaking of lances was so terrible that those who had heard it were astonished and appalled at the sound. For several fair dames swooned away with terror of the noise, and others shrieked aloud. For not only was there great uproar, but the air was altogether filled with the splinters of ash wood that flew about. In that famous assault 70 very noble and honorable knights were overthrown, many of them being trampled beneath the hoofs of the horses, Wherefore, when 2 companies withdrew in retreat, each to his station, the ground was beheld to be covered all over with broken fragments of lances, and with cantles of armor, and many knights were seen to be woefully lying in the midst of all that wreck. And some of these champions strove to arise, and could not, while others lay altogether quiet, as though in death. To these ran drivers, esquires, and pages in great number, and lifted up the fallen men, and bare them away to the places of safe harborage. And likewise attendants ran and gathered up the cantles of armor, and the broken spears, and bare them away with the barriers, so that by and by the field was altogether cleared once more. Then all those who gazed upon the meadow gave loud acclaim with great joyfulness of heart, for such a noble and glorious contest at arms and friendly essay had hardly ever been beheld in all that realm before. Now we turn unto Sir Kay. For his assault he had conducted himself with such credit that no knight who was there had done better than he, and maybe no one had done so well as he before. So though 2 opponents at once had directed their spears against him, yet he had successfully resisted their assault, and one of those 2 he smote so violently in the midst of the defenses that he had lifted the assailant entirely over the cupper of the old horse which he had rode, and he had flung him down to the distance of half a spear length behind his steed, so that the fallen knight had rolled thrice over in the dust ere he had ceased to fall. And when those of Sir Kay's party who were nigh to him beheld what he did, they gave him loud and vehement acclaim, that in such measure that Sir Kay was wonderfully well satisfied and pleased at heart. And indeed it is said so at the time there was hardly any knight in all the world who was so excellent in deeds of arms as Sir Kay. And though there were afterward came knights of many such great renown, and those of more glorious achievement, as we shall hereinafter record in good season, yet all the time Sir Kay was reckoned by many to be one of the most wonderfully puissant knights, either errant or in battle, in all of that realm. So was that course of the combat run to the great pleasure and satisfaction of all who beheld it, and more especially of Sir Kay and his friends. And after it had been completed, the 2 parties in array returned each to its assigned station once more. And when they had come there, each knight delivered up his spear unto his esquire. For the assault which was next to be made was to be undertaken with swords, wherefore all lances and other weapons were to be put away, such being the order of that courteous and gentle bout at arms. Accordingly, when the herald again blew upon his trumpet, each knight drew his weapon with such readiness for battle that there was a great splendor of blades all flashing in the air at once. And when the herald blew a second time, each party pushed forward to contest with great nobleness of heart and eagerness of spirit, every knight being moved with intent to engage his opponent with all the might and main that lay within him. Then immediately began so fierce a battle that if those knights had been very enemies of long standing, instead of friendly contestants, the blows which they had delivered upon one another could not have been more vehement as to the strength or more astonishing to gaze upon. And in this affair likewise, Sir Kay approved himself to be so extraordinary a champion that his like was nowhere to be seen in all that field, for he violently smote down 5 knights, one after another, ere he was stayed in his advance. Wherefore, beholding him to be doing work of such sort, several of the knights of the other party endeavored to come at him with intent to meet him in his advance. Among these certain knights was a hight Sir Balamorginius, who was so huge of frame that he rode head and shoulders above any other knight, and he was possessed of such extraordinary strength that it was believed that he could successfully withstand the assault of 3 ordinary knights at one time. Wherefore, when this knight beheld the work of that of Sir Kay did, he cried out to him, "Ho ho! Sir Knight of the Black Griffin, turn thou hitherward and do battle with me." Now, when Sir Kay beheld Sir Balamorginius to be minded to come against him in that wise, very threateningly and minded to do him battle, he turned him toward his enemy with great cheerfulness of spirit. For that was the time Sir Kay was very full of youth and fire, and reckoning nothing of assaulting any enemy who might demand battle of him. So being very full of spirit and youth, he turned to him with great lustiness of heart, altogether inflamed with the eagerness and fury of battle. And he cried out in a great voice, "Very well, I will do battle with thee, and I will cast thee down like thy fellows." And therewith he smote with wonderful fierceness at Sir Balamorginius, and that with all his might. And Sir Balamorginius received the stroke upon his helmet, and was altogether bewildered by the fury thereof, for he had never felt its like before that time. Wherefore his brains swam so light that it was necessary for him to hold on to the horn of his saddle to save himself from falling. But it was a great pity for Sir Kay that, with the fierceness of his blow, his sword blade snapped short of the haft, flying so high in the air that it appeared to overtop the turrets of the cathedral in its flight. Yet so it happened, and thus it befell Sir Kay was left without any weapon. Yet it was thought that because of that stroke, he had Sir Balamorginius entirely at his mercy, and that if he could have struck another blow with his sword, he might have easily overcome him. But as it was, Sir Balamorginius presently so far recovered himself he perceived that his enemy to be altogether at his mercy. Wherefore, being filled beyond measure with rage because of the blows he had received, he pushed against Sir Kay with intent to smite him down in a violent assault. In this pass, it would maybe have gone very ill with Sir Kay, but that 3 of his companions in arms, perceiving the extreme peril in which he had lay, thrust in betwixt him and Sir Balamorginius with intent to take upon themselves the assault of that night. This they did with such success that Sir Kay was able to push out from the press and escape to the barriers without suffering any further harm at the hands of his enemies. Now when he had reached the barrier, his esquire, young Arthur, came running up to him with a goblet of spiced wine, and when Sir Kay opened the umbril of his helmet for to drink, for he was athirst beyond measure, and lo, his face was all covered with blood and sweat, and he was adraught with battle, that his tongue clave to the roof of his mouth, and he could not speak. But when he had drunk of the draught of the King Arthur had gave him, his tongue was loosened, and he cried out to the young man, in a loud and violent voice, "Ho ho! Brother, get me another sword for to do battle, for I am assuredly winning our house much glory this day." And Arthur said, "Where shall I get thee a sword?" And Kay said, "Make haste unto our father's pavilion, and fetch me thence another sword, for this which I have is broken." And Arthur said, "I will do so with all speed." And thereupon he set his hand to the barrier and leapt over it into the alleyway beyond. And he ran down the alleyway with all the speed he was able, with intent to fulfill the task which his brother had bidden him to undertake. And with like speed he ran to that pavilion that his father had set up in the meadows. But when he came to the pavilion of Sir Ector, he found no one there, for all the attendants had betaken themselves unto the tournament. And neither could he find any sword fit for his brother's handling. Wherefore he was put to a great pass to know what to do in this matter. In this extremity he bethought him of that sword that had stood thrust into the anvil before the cathedral, and appeared to him that such a sword as that would suit his brother's purposes very well. Wherefore he said to himself, "I will go thither and get that sword if I am able to do so, for it will assuredly do very well for my brother, for as to finish his battle withal." Whereupon he ran with all speed to the cathedral, and when he had come there, he discovered that no one was there upon guard at the block of marble, as had hereto been the case, for all those who had been guard had taken themselves unto the contest of arms, and the anvil and the sword stood where he could reach them. So there being no one to stay young Arthur, he leapt up upon the block of marble, and laid his hands upon the hilt of the sword, and he bent his body and drew upon the sword very strongly, and lo, it came forth, and from the anvil with a wonderful smoothness and ease, and he held the sword in his hand, and it was his. And when he had got the sword in that way, he wrapped it up in his cloak, so that one might not see it there, for it was shone with exceeding brightness and splendors. And he leapt down the block of marble stone, and hastened with it unto the field of battle. Now, when Arthur had entered into that meadow once more, he found Sir Kay awaiting his coming with great impatience of spirit. And when Sir Kay saw him, he cried out very vehemently, "Hast thou got a sword?" And Arthur said, "Yea, I have one here." Thereupon he opened his cloak and showed Sir Kay what sword it was that he had brought. Now when Sir Kay beheld the sword, he immediately knew it, and he wist not what to think of what to say, wherefore he stood for a while, like one turned to stone, looking upon that sword. Then a while he said in a very strange voice, "Where got ye that sword?" And Arthur looked upon his brother, and he beheld that his countenance was greatly disturbed, and that his face was altogether as white as wax. And he said, "Brother, what ails ye that thou lookest so strangely? I will tell the entire truth. I could find no sword in our father's pavilion. Wherefore I bethought me the sword that stood in the anvil at the marble cube before the cathedral. So I went thither and made essay to draw it forth, and it came forth with wonderful ease. So when I had drawn it out, I wrapped it in my cloak and brought it hither unto thee as thee beholdest." Then Sir Kay turned his thoughts inward and communed with himself in this wise. "Lo, my brother Arthur is yet hardly more than a child, and yet he is moreover exceedingly innocent. Therefore he knoweth not what he hath done in this, nor what he is doing. Now, since he hath achieved this weapon, why should I not myself lay claim to that achievement, and so obtain the glory of which it entails?" Whereupon he presently aroused himself, and said to Arthur, "Give me the sword, and the cloak to me." And Arthur did as his brother commanded. And when he had done so, Sir Kay said to him, "Tell no man of this, but keep it privy in thine own heart. Meantime, go to our father, where he sits at the lists, and bid come straightway unto the pavilion where we have taken up our inn." And Arthur did as Sir Kay commanded him, greatly possessed with wonder that his brother should be so disturbed in spirit as he appeared to be. For he wist not what he had done in drawing out that sword from the anvil, nor did he know of the great things that should arise from such a little thing. For it is so in this world that a man sometimes approves himself to be worthy of such a great trust as that, and yet, in lowness of spirit, he is yet altogether unaware that he is worthy thereof. So Arthur made haste to that part of the lists where Sir Ector sat with the people of his household, and he stood before his father and said, "Sire, my brother Kay hath sent me hitherward for to bid thee come straightway upon the pavilion where we have taken up our inn. And truly, I think something very extraordinary hath befallen for my brother Kay." Then Sir Ector marveled very greatly what it was that should cause Sir Kay to quit that battle and to summon him in such a time, wherefore he rose from where he sat and went with Arthur. And when they went to the pavilion, and they had come there, behold, Sir Kay was standing in the midst of the pavilion. And Sir Ector saw that his face was as white as ash of wood, and that his eyes shone with wonderful brightness. And Sir Ector said, "My son, what ails thee?" Whereunto Sir Kay made reply, "Sire, here is a very wonderful matter." Therewith he took from his father by the hand, and brought him to the table that stood in the pavilion. And upon the table there lay a cloak, and there was something within the cloak. Then Sir Kay opened the cloak, and lo, there lay the sword of the anvil, and the hilt thereof, and the blade thereof glistening with exceeding splendor. And Sir Ector immediately knew that sword, and whence it came, wherefore he was filled with such astonishment that he wist not what to do, and for a while his tongue refused to speak. And after a while he found speech, and cried out in a great voice, "What is this that mine eyes behold?" To this Sir Kay made reply, "Sire, I have that sword which stood a while since embedded in the anvil that stands upon the cube of marble stone before the great cathedral. Wherefore I demand that thou shalt tell us me what this may portend." Then Sir Ector said, "How came you by that sword?" And for a while Sir Kay was silent, but after a while he said, "Sire, I brake my sword in that battle of which I had lately fought, whereupon I found me this sword in its stead." Then Sir Ector was altogether amazed, and knew not whether to believe what his ears heard. And after a while he said, "If so that thou didst draw forth the sword from that anvil, then it must be so that thou art rightwise King of Britain, for as thou saying the sword proclaimeth. But if thou didst draw the sword from the anvil, then it will be thou hast easily able to thrust it back again from that place which you did take it." At this a great trouble of spirit fell upon Sir Kay, and he cried out in a very loud voice, "Who may do such a thing as that, and who could perform so great a miracle as to thrust a sword into solid iron?" Whereunto Sir Ector made reply, "Such a miracle is no greater than the miracle thou hast performed in drawing it out from its embedment. For who ever heard of a man who could draw forth a sword from a place, and yet would not thrust it back whence he drew it?" Then Sir Kay wist not what to say to his father, and he greatly feared that he should not be able to perform that miracle. But nevertheless he took what comfort to himself he was able, saying, "If my young brother Arthur was able to perform this miracle, why should I not be able to do a miracle of a like sort? For assuredly I am not less worthy than he. Wherefore, if he drew the sword forth with such ease, it may be that I with equal ease shall be able to thrust it back into its place once again." Accordingly, he took such comfort to himself in these thoughts as he was able. So he wrapped the sword in the cloak again, and when he had done so, he and Sir Ector went forth from the pavilion, and betook their way unto was the marble stone and the anvil before the cathedral. And Arthur went with his father and his brother, and they forbade him not. And when they had come to that place where the sword had been, Sir Kay mounted upon the cube of marble stone and beheld the face of the anvil. And lo, the face of the anvil was altogether smooth and without a scratch, or scar of any sort. And Sir Kay said to himself, "What is this that my father would have me do? What man is there in life who could thrust a sword blade into a solid anvil of iron?" But nevertheless he could not withdraw from that impossible undertaking, but was constrained to essay that miracle. Wherefore he set the point of the sword to the iron, and bore upon it with all his strength. But it was impossible for him to accomplish that thing. And though he endeavored with all his might with the sword against the face of the anvil, yet did he not pierce the iron even the breadth of a hair. So after he had thus essayed for a great while, he at last ceased what he had came down from there he stood. And he said to his father, "Sire, no man in life may perform that miracle." Unto this Sir Ector made reply, How is it possible then that thou couldst have drawn that sword out? Thou sayest, yet cannot put it back again. Then young Arthur lifted up his voice and said, My father, have I thy leave to speak? And Sir Ector said, Speak, my son. And Arthur said, I would that I might essay to handle that sword. Whereunto Sir Ector replied, By what authority wouldst thou handle that sword? And Arthur said, Because it was I who drew that sword from the anvil for my brother. Wherefore, as thou sayest, to draw it forth is not more difficult than to thrust it back again. So I believe that I shall be able to set it back into the iron from whence I drew it. Then Sir Ector gazed upon young Arthur in such a strange manner that Arthur wist not what he looked at him in that wise. Wherefore he cried out, Sire, what dost thou gaze so strangely upon me? Hast thou anger against me? Whereunto Sir Ector made reply, In the sight of God, my son, I have no anger against thee, he said. If thou hast to desire to handle that sword, thou mayest assuredly make essay of that miracle. So Arthur took the sword from his brother Kay, and he leapt upon the marble stone. And he set the point of the sword upon the anvil, and bare very strongly upon it. And lo, the sword penetrated very smoothly into the center of the anvil, until it stood midway deep therein, and there it stood fast. After he had performed that miracle, he drew the sword forth again, very swiftly and easily, and then thrust it back again once more as he had done before. But when Sir Ector beheld what Arthur did, he cried out in a voice of exceeding loudness, Lord, Lord, what is that miracle mine eyes behold? And when Arthur came down from the cube of the marble stone, Sir Ector knelt down before him and set his hands together, palm to palm. But when Arthur beheld what his father did, he cried out aloud, like in great measure of pain, and said, my father, what dost thou kneel down before me? To him Sir Ector made reply, I am not thy father, and now it is made manifest that thou art assuredly a very exalted race, and that the blood of kings flows in thy veins, else thou couldst not have handled that sword as thou hast done. Then Arthur fell a weeping beyond all measure, and he cried out with great agony of spirit, Father, what is this thou sayest? I beseech thee, arise, and not kneel unto me. So Sir Ector arose from his knees and stood before the face of Arthur, and he said, Arthur, why dost thou weep? And Arthur said, Because I am afraid. Now all this while Sir Kay had stood near by, and could neither move nor speak, but stood like one entranced, and he said to himself, What is this? Is my brother a king? And then Sir Ector spoke, saying, Arthur, the time hath come for thee to know thyself, for thy true circumstances of thy life have hereunto been altogether hidden from thee. Now I do confess everything to thee in this wise, that 18 years ago there came to me a certain man, very wise and high in favor with Uther Pendragon, and that man was the enchanter Merlin. And Merlin showed me the signet ring of Uther Pendragon, and he commanded me by virtue of that ring that I should be at a certain assigned place at a particular time which he nominated. And in that place which he assigned was the postern gate of the Uther Pendragon's castle, and the time which he had named was midnight of that very day. And he bade me tell no man aught concerning those things which he had communicated to me, and so I kept his counsel as he had desired me to do so. So I went to that postern gate at midnight as Merlin had commanded, and that place there came unto me Merlin and another man, and the other man was Sir Ulfius, who was the chief knight of Uther Pendragon's household. And I tell thee with these two worthies stood higher unto Uther Pendragon than any other men in all of the world. Now when those two came unto me, I perceived that Merlin bare in his arms a certain thing wrapped in a scarlet mantle of fine texture. And he opened the folds of the mantle, and lo, I beheld a child not long born wrapped in swaddling clothes. And I saw the child in the light of a lawthorn which Sir Ulfius bare, and I perceived that he was very fair of face and large of bone, and thou wert that child. Then Merlin commanded me in this wise, that I was to take that child, and that I should rear him as mine own, and that he said the child was to be called by the name of Arthur, and that he said that no one in all the world was to know otherwise that the child was mine own. And I told Merlin that I would do as he would have me, whereupon I took the child and bore it away with me. And I proclaimed that the child was mine own, and all over the world believed my words, wherefore no one ever knew otherwise that thou wert mine own son. And that lady who was my wife, when she died, she took that secret with her unto paradise. And since then until now, no one in all the world knew aught of this matter, but I and those two aforementioned worthies. Nor have I until now ever known aught of who was thy father. But now I do suspect who he was, and that thou hast in thy veins very high and kingly blood. And I do have in mind that perhaps thy father was Uther Pendragon himself. For who but the son of Uther Pendragon could have drawn forth that sword from out of the anvil as thou hast done? Then, when Arthur heard that saying of his father's, he cried out in a very loud, vehement voice, Woe, woe, woe is I, saying that word 3 times. And Sir Ector replied, Arthur, why art thou woeful? And Arthur said, Because I have lost my father, for I would rather have my father than be a king. Now, as these things passed, there came to that place 2 men, very tall and wonderfully noble and of haughty appearance. And when these 2 men had come nigh to whether they were, Arthur and Sir Ector and Sir Kay perceived that one of them was the enchanter Merlin, and that the other was that of Sir Ulfius. For those 2 men were very famous and well known unto all the world. And when those 2 had come to where the 3, Merlin spake, saying, What cheer? And Sir Ector made answer, Here is cheer of a very wonderful sort. For behold, Merlin, this is that child that thou didst bring to me 18 years ago. And lo, thou seest he has grown unto manhood. Then Merlin said, Sir Ector, I know very well who is this youth, for I have kept diligent watch over him all this time, and I know that in him lieth the hope of Britain. Moreover, I tell thee that even today within the surface of an enchanted looking-glass I have beheld all that he hath done since the morning, and I know that he drew forth the sword from the anvil, and how he thrust it back again. And I know how he drew it forth and thrust it back again a second time. I know all that thou hast been saying unto him this while. Wherefore, I also do now avouch that thou hast told him the very truth. And lo, the spirit of prophecy is upon me, and I do foresee in the future that thou, Arthur, shall become the greatest and most famous king that ever lived in Britain. And I do foresee that many knights of extraordinary excellence shall gather about thee, and that men shall tell of their marvelous deeds as long as this land shall continue. And I do foresee that though these knights, thy region shall be full of splendor and glory. And I do foresee that the most marvelous adventure of the Holy Grail shall be achieved by 3 of the knights of thy court, and that of thy lasting renown, who shall be the king under whose reign the Holy Cup shall be achieved. All of these things I foresee, and lo, the time is now at hand when the glory of thy house shall again be made manifest unto the world, and all of the people of this land shall rejoice in thee and thy kinghood. Wherefore, Sir Ector, for these 3 days to come, I do charge it upon thee that thou do guard this young man as the apple of thine eye, for in him doth lie the hope and salvation of all of this realm. Then Sir Ector lifted up his voice and cried unto Arthur, A boon! A boon! And Arthur said, Alas, how is this? Dost thou, my father, ask a boon of me, who may have all in the world what is mine to give? Ask what thou, and wilt it is thine. Then Sir Ector said, I do beseech this of thee, that when thou art king, thy brother Kay may be seneschal of all of this realm. And Arthur replied, It shall be as thou dost ask. And he said, As for thee, it shall be still better with thee, for thou shalt be my father unto the end. And whereupon, so saying, he took Sir Ector's head into his hands, and he kissed Sir Ector upon the forehead and upon the cheeks, and so sealed his polite word. But all this while Sir Kay had stood unto like one struck by thunder, and he wist not whether to be uplifted unto the skies, or to be cast down into the depths, that his young brother should thus have been past him, and exalted unto the extraordinary altitude of fortune. Whereupon he stood to like one bereft of life and motion. And let it here be said that Arthur fulfilled all that he had thus promised to his father, for in after times he made Sir Kay his seneschal, and Sir Ector was to him a father unto the day of his death, which same befell 5 years from that time. So when the morning of Christmas Day had come, many thousands of folk of all qualities, both gentle and simple, gathered together in front of the cathedral for to behold the assay of that sword. Now there had been a canopy of embroidered cloth of divers colors, spread above the sword and anvil, and a platform had been built around the cube of marble stone. And nigh unto that place there had been a throne for the archbishop established, for the archbishop was to overlook that assay, and see that every circumstance was fulfilled with due equity and circumspection. So when the morning was half gone, by the archbishop himself came with great pomp of estate, and took his seat upon the high throne that had been placed for him, and all his court of clerks and knights gathered about him, so that he presented a very proud and excellent appearance of courtliness. Now unto that assay there had gathered 19 knights and 16 dukes, and each of these was of such noble and exalted estate that he entertained high hopes that he would have that day approved before the world to be the right king and overlord of all Britain. Wherefore, after the archbishop had established himself upon his throne, there came several of these, and made demand that he should straightway put the matter to the test. So the archbishop commanded his herald for to sound a trumpet, and bid all those who had right to make assay of the sword to come upon that adventure. And the herald did according as the archbishop ordered. And when that herald had sounded his trumpet, there immediately appeared the first of those kings to make trial of the sword. And he who came was King Lot of Orkney of the Isles. And with King Lot came 11 knights and 5 esquires, so that he appeared in very noble estate before the eyes of all. And when King Lot had arrived at that place, he mounted the platform. And first he saluted the archbishop, and then he laid his hands upon the pommel of the sword in the sight of all. And he bent with his body and drew upon the sword with great strength, but he could not move as the blade in the anvil even so much as a breadth of a hair, for it stood as fast as the iron in which it was planted. And after that first assay, he tried 3 times more, but still he was altogether unable to move the blade in the iron. Then, after that he had thus 4 times made assay, he ceased his endeavor and came down from that place, and he was filled with great anger and indignation that he had not succeeded in his endeavor. And after King Lot there came his brother-in-law, King Urain of Gore, and he also made assay in the same wise as King Lot had done, but neither did he succeed any better than that of the other king. And after King Urain there came King Fionn of Scotland, and after King Fionn there came King Mark of Cornwall, and after King Mark there came King Rance of North Wales, and after King Rance there came King Leo de Grance of Camellard, and after him came all those other kings and dukes before enumerated, and not one of all of these was able to move the blade. And some of these high and mighty lords were filled with anger and indignation that they had not succeeded, and others were ashamed that they had failed in that undertaking before the eyes of all of those who looked upon them. But whether they were angry or whether they were ashamed, it is no wise helped their case. Now, when all the kings and dukes had thus failed in that adventure, the people who were there were very much astonished, and they said to one another, "How is this? If all those kings and dukes of very exalted estate have failed to achieve that adventure, who then may hope to succeed? For there have been all those who are most worthy of that high honor, and all who have tried to draw that sword have failed. Who then is there now to come after these who may hope to succeed?" And likewise those kings and dukes spoke together in the same manner. And by there came 6 of the most worthy, to wit, King Lot, King Urain, King Pellinore, King Ban, King Rience, and King Clarence of Northumberland. And these stood before the throne of the archbishop, and spake to him in this wise: "Sire, here have all the kings and dukes of this realm striven before you to draw forth that sword. And lo, not one of all those who have undertaken that thing hath succeeded in this undertaking. What then may we understand by what that enchanter Merlin hath set this adventure for, to bring shame and discredit upon all those who are here, and upon you, who are the lead of this church in this realm? For who in all the world may hope to draw forth a sword blade out of a bed of solid iron? Behold, it is beyond the power of any man. It is not then plain to see that Merlin hath made a mock of us all. Now therefore, lest all this great congregation should have been called here in vain, we do beseech you of your wisdom, that you presently choose the one among the kings here gathered, who may be best fitted to be overlord of this realm. And when ye have chosen him, we will promise to obey him in all things whatsoever he may ordain. Verily, such a choice was that will be better worth while than to spend time at this foolish task of striving to draw forth a sword out of an anvil which no man in all the world may draw forth." Then was the archbishop much troubled in spirit, for he said to himself, "Can it be sooth that Merlin hath deceived me, and that hath made a mock of me and all of these kings and lordly folk? Surely this cannot be, for Merlin is passing wise, and he would not make a mock of all of the realm for the sake of so sorry a jest as this would be. Certes, he hath some intent in this which we know not, being of less wisdom than he, wherefore I will be patient for a while longer." Accordingly, having communed with thus himself, he spake aloud in this wise of those 7 high lords. "Messires," he said, "I have faith that Merlin hath not deceived us. Wherefore, I pray your patience for one little while longer. For if in a time a man may count to 500 twice over, no one cometh forward to perform this task, then will I, at your behest, proceed to choose one from among you, and will proclaim him king and overlord of all." For the archbishop had faith that Merlin was about to immediately declare a king before them all. Now leave we these men, and turn we unto Arthur and his father and brother. For Merlin had bidden these 3 to abide in the pavilion until such time as he thought would be fit for them to come out thence. And that time being now come, Merlin and Sir Ulfius went to the pavilion of Sir Ector and Merlin, and said, "Arthur, Arise and come forth, for now the hour is come for thee to essay before the whole world that miracle which thou didst of late execute in privacy. So Arthur did as Merlin bade him, and he came forth from the pavilion with his father and his brother. And lo, he was like one who walked in a dream. So they five went down from thence toward the cathedral and unto that assay. And when they had come to the congregation that was there assembled, the people made way for them, greatly marveling, and saying to one another, Who are these with the enchanter Merlin and Sir Ulfius, and whence come they? For all the world knew of Merlin and Sir Ulfius, and they wist that here was something very extraordinary about to happen. And Arthur was clad all in flame-colored raiment, embroidered with threads of silver, so that others of the people said, Certes, that youth is very fair for to look upon. Now, who may he be? But Merlin said no words to any man, but he brought Arthur through the press unto that place where the archbishop sat. And the press made way for him, so that he was not stayed in his going. And when the archbishop beheld Merlin come thus with those others, he arose and said, Merlin, who are these whom thou bringest unto us, and what is their business here? And Merlin replied, Lord, here is one who has come to make the assay of yonder sword. And the archbishop said, Which one is he? And Merlin said, This is he, and he laid his hand upon Arthur. Then the archbishop looked upon Arthur, and he beheld that the youth was very comely of face. Wherefore his heart went out to Arthur, and he loved him a very great deal. And the archbishop said, Merlin, by what right doth this young man come hither? And Merlin made reply, Lord, he cometh hither by the best right that there is in the world. For he who standeth before thee clad in red is the true son of Uther Pendragon, and of his lawful wife, Queen Igraine. And the archbishop cried aloud in great amazement, and those who stood nigh and who heard what Merlin had said were so astonished that they knew not wist what to think. And the archbishop said, Merlin, what is thou thus telling me? For who until now in all the world hath ever heard that Uther Pendragon had a son? Unto this Merlin made reply, No one hath ever known of such a thing until now, only a very few. For it was in this wise, when this child was born, the spirit of prophecy lay upon me, and I foresaw that Uther Pendragon would die before a very great while. Wherefore I feared that the enemies of the king would lay violent hands upon the young child for the sake of his inheritance. So, at the king's behest, I and another took the young child from his mother, and gave him unto a third, and that man received the kingly child and maintained him ever since as his own. And as to the truth of these things, there are others here who may attest to the verity of them. For those who were with me when the young child was taken from his mother was Sir Ulfius, and to he whom he was entrusted was Sir Ector of Bonmaison. And those two witnesses, who are without any reproach, will avouch of the verity which I have asserted. For here they stand before thee to certify unto what I have said. And Sir Ulfius and Sir Ector said, All that Merlin hath spoke is true, and thereunto we pledge our most faithful and sacred word of honor. And the archbishop said, Who is there who may doubt the word of such honorable witnesses? And he looked upon Arthur and smiled upon him. Then Arthur said, Have I then thy leave, Lord, to handle yonder sword? And the archbishop replied, Thou hast my leave, and may the grace of God go with thee to do thy endeavor. Thereupon Arthur went to the cube of marble stone, and laid his hands upon the haft of the sword that was thrust into the anvil. And he bent his body, and drew very strongly, and lo, the sword came forth with great ease and very smoothly. And when he had got the sword into his hands, he swung it about his head so that it flashed like lightning. And after he had swung it thrice about his head, he set the point thereof against the face of the anvil, and bore it upon strongly. And behold, the sword slid very smoothly back into that place where it had aforetime stood. And when he was there midway deep, it stood fast where it was. And thus did Arthur successfully accomplish that marvelous miracle of the sword in the eyes of all the world. Now when the people who were congregated at that place beheld this miracle performed before their faces, they lifted up their voices all together, and shouted so vehemently that with huge a tumult of outcry, that it was as though the whole world rocked and trembled with the sound of their shouting. And whiles they shouted, Arthur took hold of the sword again, and drew it forth, and swung it once more, and again drave it into the anvil. And when he had done that, he drew it forth a third time, and did the same thing as before. Thus it was that all those who were there beheld that miracle performed 3 times over. And all the kings and dukes who were there were filled with great amazement, and they wist not what to think or to say when they beheld one who was so little more than a boy perform that undertaking in which the best of them had failed. And some of them, seeing that miracle, were willing to acknowledge Arthur because of it, but others would not acknowledge him. These withdrew themselves and stood aloof. As they stood thus apart, they said among themselves, "What is this, and who can accredit such a thing, that a beardless boy should be set before us all, and should be made king and overlord of this great realm, for to govern us? Nay, nay, we will have none of him for our king." And others said, "Is it not apparent that Merlin and Sir Ulfius are thus exalting this unknown boy, so that they may elevate themselves along with him?" Thus these discontent kings spake amongst themselves, and of all of them the most bitter were King Lot and of King Uraine, who were brothers by marriage with Arthur. Now when the archbishop perceived the discontent of these kings and dukes, he said to them, "How now, messires, are ye not satisfied?" And they said, "We are not satisfied." And the archbishop replied, "What would ye have?" And they said, "We would have another sort of king for Britain than a beardless boy of whom no one knoweth, and of whose birthright there was only 3 men to attest." And the archbishop said, "What of that? Hath ye not performed the miracle that ye yourselves essayed and failed to perform?" But these high and mighty lords would not be satisfied, but with angry and averted faces they went away from that place, filled with wrath and indignation. But others of these kings and dukes came and saluted Arthur and paid him court, giving him joy of that which he had achieved. And of the chiefest of those who had came thus unto him in friendliness was King Leo de Grance of Camillard. And of the multitude acknowledged him and crowded around the place, shouting so that it sounded like the noise of thunder. Now all this while Sir Ector and Sir Kay had stood upon one side, and they were greatly weighed down by sorrow, for it appeared to them that Arthur had all of a sudden been uplifted so far from their estate that they might never hope to approach him once more. For now he was of kingly consequence, and they but common knights. And after a while Arthur beheld where they stood with downcast looks, whereupon he straightway went to them and took first one of them and then the other by the hand, and kissed each upon the cheek. Thereupon they were again very glad at being thus uplifted unto him. And after Arthur departed from that place, great crowds of people followed after him, that the streets were altogether filled with the press of people, and the multitude continually gave him loud acclaim as the chosen King of England. And of those who were nearest to him sought to touch the hem of his garments. Wherefore the heart of Arthur was exceedingly uplifted with great joy and gladness, so that his soul took wing and flew like a bird into the sky. Thus Arthur achieved the adventure of the sword, and that day had entered into his birthright of royalty. Wherefore may God grant his grace upon you all, that ye too may likewise succeed in your undertakings. For any man may be a king in that life in which he is placed, if so be he may draw forth the sword of success from out from the iron of circumstance. Wherefore, when your time to essay cometh, I do hope it may be with you as it was with Arthur that day, and that ye too may achieve success with entire satisfaction unto yourself and to your great glory and perfect happiness.